Part 2. Creating the 12 blocks of your business plan. Chapter 4. Enemy and competition. I got enemies, got a lot of enemies. Got a lot of people trying to drain me of my energy. Drake, energy. To be a winner, you must learn from winners. It's by design that I have studied Tom Brady like a hawk. As you'll see in the building block on culture, I created a unique event to watch the documentary Man in the Arena. I led a debriefing that included a Q&A with some of Brady's Super Bowl winning teammates. I can't tell you what Tom Brady was thinking at every moment of his storied career, but I can make some solid guesses. When he arrived at Michigan and was buried on the depth chart, his enemies were the quarterbacks ahead of him. To a bench warmer, the players on the field are the obvious enemies. When 198 players were selected ahead of Brady in the 2000 NFL Draft, you would think they became his enemies. But just like saying that every mortgage broker or real estate agent in North America is your enemy, that choice would be too broad to create emotion. That's why Brady could zero in on the 6 quarterbacks selected ahead of him: Chad Pennington, Giovanni Carmazzi, Chris Redman, T. Martin, Mark Bulger, and Spurgeon. Win. Being chosen after these 6 quarterbacks put a chip on Brady's shoulder and provided the fuel to compete harder than what seemed possible. But imagine if, after he won his first Super Bowl, he kept competing with this group. That would be like Usain Bolt focusing on beating me in the 100-meter dash. Brady had to keep choosing a new enemy. He stored plenty of chips on his shoulders long enough to win his 3rd Super Bowl in 2005. Before he turned 28, Brady was tied for second with Troy Aikman for the most Super Bowl wins by a quarterback. Brady then went 9 years before another big enemy arrived, and to me, it was no coincidence that he didn't win a Super Bowl in those years. Then, in 2014, a few months before Brady turned 37, Bill Belichick drafted Brady's replacement, Jimmy Garoppolo. The message seemed clear: your days are numbered until the young stud takes over. So what do you think happened the first season that Garoppolo was on the team? Brady won his 4th Super Bowl. Terry Bradshaw and Joe Montana were the only other quarterbacks to win 4. 2 years later, the Patriots faced the Atlanta Falcons in the 2017 Super Bowl. In the documentary Man in the Arena, Brady expressed how concerned he was about his mother, who was fighting cancer. She was at the game, and he was worried about losing the Super Bowl in front of his entire family. With a heavy heart, Brady took the field against the Falcons, and things went from bad to worse in a hurry. With just over 2 minutes remaining in the 3rd quarter, the Falcons had a 28-3 lead. When it appeared that all hope was lost, Brady led the most incredible comeback in NFL history. The Patriots won, 34-28. That off-season, Brady turned 40 and stood alone among quarterbacks with 5 Super Bowl rings. There were no more obvious enemies to defeat, which meant it was time to ride off into the sunset. He could continue to earn tens of millions of dollars as a broadcaster and businessman. So what did Brady do? He graduated to new enemies. All he had to do was open his ears to hear how he couldn't succeed in his 40s. ESPN's Max Kellerman had said on First Take, Tom Brady is just about done. It could be his next game he plays, it could be a year from now. But he is going to fall off a cliff. Tom Brady is going to be a bum in short order. Kellerman's comments were in line with what others were saying. Few people believed Brady, or any athlete, could be successful at that age. Brady also could look at his coach, Bill Belichick, who many suggested cared more about the future than the past. Just as you will do every year, Brady chose new enemies. At the end of the 2018 season, he won his 6th Super Bowl. Those around Brady knew how to push his buttons. Even when done in a fun way, talking trash to someone who is fighting an enemy can be a huge motivator. I loved seeing the footage of wide receiver Julian Edelman yelling at Brady on the sideline, "You're too old. You're too old." As a leader, you have to know who can and can't handle these types of challenges. With awareness, you can create emotion in people that pushes them to bring out their best. During the 2023 NBA playoffs, when the Golden State Warriors were facing the Los Angeles Lakers, Stephen A. Smith of ESPN said, "If Steph Curry beats LeBron in the series, and dare I say, wins his 5th NBA championship, we might have to remove LeBron James off of Mount Rushmore and put Steph Curry on it." That message was so powerful that it made me wonder if Jeannie Buss, the owner of the Lakers, begged Stephen A. to say it. I'm not saying she did. Or that Stephen A., who I gained great respect for after I interviewed him, speaks for others. I'm saying that it's the type of strategy that brilliant leaders use to light a fire under competitive people. When the Lakers won the series, my vote for series MVP was Stephen A. for pouring rocket fuel on LeBron in the form of an enemy. Before we continue talking about Brady, I want you to think about your enemies. I also want you to consider these questions: are they outside your house or inside your house? Are they outside your organization or inside your organization? The distinction could make all the difference in the world. Why do you think drill sergeants pick on new soldiers? So the new recruits can use that hate to form a bond with one another. The drill sergeant becomes an external enemy of the platoon as a way to create a wartime mentality. This is done so that the soldiers focus on beating the enemy instead of fighting among themselves. It's important to recognize the harm that can occur when the enemy you pick is supposed to be on your side. For example, I know many people who see their spouse as their enemy. Others see their kids as enemies. These people have not chosen their enemies wisely. You do not want war inside your home. Of course, my 2 sons get competitive with each other, which is why when we play a game, I set it up as them against me, 2 against 1. This way, they are teammates instead of competitors, and, man, do they love to beat daddy. This reinforces to my sons that they are on the same team and will use their energy to fight for, and not against, each other. Is there natural sibling rivalry between them? Absolutely. Do I invoke it to turn them against each other even more? Absolutely not. It's a strategy that James Jordan used to motivate his sons Michael and Larry. It might have been effective, but in my view, it's a delicate balance. A little bit of fire keeps the home warm, too much of it burns it down. I use my approach to create unity inside my home because I know there will always be plenty of enemies outside my home to bring out the best in my sons. Even in-laws can work as enemies. As long as you and your spouse agree that your in-laws, regardless of whose parents they are, meddle too much, you can use them to strengthen your bond. There's another level to it that I often see in power couples. If you and your spouse share an enemy, you will never hear a word about how you're working too hard or why your schedule is always booked. Instead, you support each other to defeat this enemy and use that fuel to grow richer and closer. Outside enemies unify and inspire a team. Internal enemies tier. Apart a team. The same dynamic exists within an organization. As a leader, I build a culture of intense competition. The second best sales rep may get irritated by the best, just as a C-suite executive gets irritated by the CEO. If it comes from being challenged, it's healthy. This is different from a culture that creates internal enemies. In that type of organization, you have backstabbing, politicking, and misdirected emotion. You have managers who shield talent from upper management for fear of being passed up. These are the same people who talk negatively behind the leaders' backs. Some say that having the wrong enemies is what ruined the 2019 season for the Patriots. There were rumors that Belichick had made Brady an enemy, and the relationship between quarterback and coach became toxic. The Patriots lost to the Tennessee Titans in the wild card game, the team's first loss in a home playoff game in 8 years. When Brady looked back at the season, he went through the same process you will do each and every year. Even though Brady had established himself as the best quarterback of all time, he still didn't have to search far to find 4 distinct enemies. 1. The haters and doubters, like Max Kellerman, who said he was washed up. 2. His own coach, Bill Belichick, who some said had lost faith in him and had banned Brady's trainer and close friend, Alex Guerrero, from the team plane and the sideline on game days. 3. Patrick Mahomes, who won his first Super Bowl at age 24, and who many were predicting would be better than Brady. 4. Michael Jordan, who won 6 NBA championships and was regarded as the greatest of all time, GOAT, in any sport. Those enemies produced emotion. They were rocket fuel for Brady to start at ground zero. Since his first building block had been formed, he went to work on the remaining 11. First, he found a new team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In doing so, he had the chance to prove that he, and not Belichick, was the main reason for winning the first 6 Super Bowls. Then he got to work creating the culture, updating his skills, and defining his mission. Less than a year later, Patrick Mahomes proved a worthy choice as an enemy when his Kansas City Chiefs won the AFC and made it to Super Bowl LV. Brady had used the fuel from his enemies to bring his new team, the Buccaneers, to that final game of the season as well. The winner? The man who chose his enemies the wisest, Tom Brady. What you will learn in this chapter. In this chapter, and in the 5 chapters that follow, we're going to learn how to integrate emotion and logic through each pair of building blocks. Filling in these blocks will be the foundation of your business plan. If you don't find an enemy to fill out the first building block, you can still fill out the rest. By taking the time to think about 11 different aspects of your business, you can build a decent machine. But without the fuel of an enemy, your best case scenario is to have a solid year and a solid business. If you want to be part of the audacious few, that's not what you're after. You need to go deeper to find an enemy that produces a fire inside you. There's a difference between competition and enemy. You can list your competitors without any emotion. But who pisses you off? Who's the person who said you'd never make it? In this chapter, we'll look at 14 different types of enemies. If you're willing to visit some uncomfortable places inside you, you will identify an enemy that moves you. You're going to look back and say, I remember when I wanted to go out there and kill that competition. Or I woke up every day full of fire to make so and so eat their words. That's a different feeling than wanting to gain more market share than your competition. Once we're full of emotion inspired by our enemies, we can focus on The more strategic parts of beating our competitors and finding our niche in the marketplace. We'll ask questions such as, what competitors aren't so obvious but still need to be monitored? And how can I get ahead of my competitors and stop them before they become a real threat? Name what is stopping you. As a leader, you must find out what moves people. Whether you are interviewing a job candidate or giving a sales presentation, logical questions lead to rote answers that offer no clues about what drives someone. When I meet new people, I ask questions about their upbringing, heartache, regrets, and fears. I also ask what they dreamed about as a kid and how alive those dreams still are. I want to know what moves them, so together we can identify their enemy. If I could look you in the eye right now, I'd be asking those same questions. All these stories I'm telling are for you to figure out what drives you the most. I want you to remember why you used to sprint out of bed in the morning. I want you to tap into the meaning behind what you do. Right enemies equals relentless drive. Enemies don't have to be people. They can also be things like government institutions, religious persecution, or censorship. You can also view enemies as the roadblock to your success or the success of your customer. Alex Banks, an expert on AI and technology, shared on Twitter 10 simple storytelling tips from Elon Musk to nail your next pitch. Not surprisingly, the first step was name the enemy. Banks tweeted, Musk immediately says this is how it is today, it sucks. He then wrote, start by naming the thing that's getting in the way of your customer's happiness. It doesn't have to be Darth Vader or the Wicked Witch of the West. Musk makes it fossil fuels. I would add that Musk is equally fueled by a father who bullied him and countless others who doubted him and his ideas. Why do you think Musk loves to call out people? Because he wants to continuously invite enemies into his world. Your enemy could be predatory lending, the obesity epidemic, or the failure of public schools to teach the right values. As long as you can tap into the emotion from that enemy, you have the chance to be unstoppable. I know it sounds dramatic. It may be too intense for some. Succeeding at the highest level is harder than you think. I lived through a war in Iran, joined the army, and dug a financial hole that almost buried me. I think I'm resilient, but I still had moments when I wondered if my business or I would survive. Without an enemy to drive me, I never would have found the strength to persevere. How to judge your enemies. At this point, some of you may be throwing darts at your enemies, while others of you may still claim that you don't have an enemy. You may even insist that you're working for your family and team, not against anyone. Even if that's the current reality for both you and your team, you have to dig deeper to identify enemies. I've seen over and over how needing to defeat a specific enemy is far more powerful than just wanting to win. In sports, the enemy is easy to identify. You know who you have to beat to win the championship, or, in Brady's case, to cement your legacy as the GOAT. This provides perpetual motivation. In movies, the villains are clearly identified. The hero's journey is not complete until the enemy is defeated. In business and in life, the enemy is not so easily defined, which is why you must name them and go after them. You judge an enemy based on the amount of emotion they create. The more emotion, the more the enemy fuels your success. The enemies that you rate highest are the ones that make you focus, put out more effort, and create more urgency. They give you a point to prove. A great example was a residential real estate agent in South Florida who I interviewed when I was looking at houses. She was a calm, personable and professional woman. It was no surprise that she was number 3 in her market, which netted her a multi-7-figure income. I bet you can guess the first question I asked her after I learned she was third in the market. That's right, I asked her how she felt about the number 1 real estate agent in her market. I said, "How badly do you want to beat him?" She turned red. I saw the fire in her eyes as she said, "I want to kill him." She had sold $500 million in real estate in 2021. She grew up dirt poor in Eastern Europe and immigrated to the US as a teenager. She resented the fact that her competitor, her enemy, came from money and grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. I met the guy, and sure enough, he walked like he was better than everyone. And she felt it and resented it. That enemy gets an A+. It gets her out of bed at 5 o'clock every morning ready to destroy. A great enemy makes you want to win to avoid the pain of shame and embarrassment. Do you have someone like that in your life? How about your business? Once you know your enemy, here are 3 important questions to ask. 1. Why do you want to defeat this enemy? 2. What will it feel like when you defeat this enemy? 3. What reward will you give yourself when you defeat this enemy? How to identify your enemies. Still searching for an enemy? If you need another reminder, think about the haters, the doubters, the people who rejected you, the unimpressed family members, and the trolls. The people who made you feel small or like you weren't part of the club are also great motivators. Did it hurt when your old girlfriend called you a loser before she dumped you, or when your guidance counselor said you had a future digging ditches? Those people and those words are the catalysts. They ignite your insecurities that sting the most. What insecurities sting the most? The ones that you fear to be true. Notice that I didn't say true. I said fear to be true. You may not believe you'll be digging ditches, but you may have a fear of working a dead-end job. You may not identify as a loser, but you may have a fear of being alone. While you're climbing the ladder of success, you shouldn't need to look hard to find enemies. When you're at the top, whether that means being number 1 in the office, the region, or the nation, you have to find new targets to go after. For the killers, you'll be forced to look outside your company for competition. I mentor a woman named Sheena Sapala. She and her husband, Matt, were the leading earners in the financial services company I founded. Like Tom Brady, Sheena had no one left to beat within the company. That's why she went after the top performer in her entire industry. Sheena doesn't get emotional from hating this person. I imagine she sees him the way Brady viewed Jordan, respecting him from a distance, while studying him to get better. But you know who does piss her off? The people who tell her that she'll never reach his level. That gives her the fuel to prove these doubters wrong and keep her focused on her target. She goes out of her way to talk a big game so others will doubt her. That's Sheena's way of finding enemies. At one point, Sheena and Matt lost their spot as number 1 in the company. This is a lesson to constantly stay paranoid and keep a close watch on your competitors. The good news is that Sheena now has even more motivation. She keeps one eye on regaining her place at the top of the company while reaching for a higher bar by chasing the industry leader. Since enemies are like rocket fuel, you have to find creative ways to identify them. Maybe you've identified your personal enemy but still want to identify an enemy for your company. It's powerful when you can find a person or another business that makes your team emotional. Our team at Valuetainment doesn't view mainstream media as competitors. We view any Opposition to free speech, freedom, and capitalism as an enemy. This is the type of emotion that creates loyalty that you don't see from employees who are working for a paycheck. If you need to jog your memory, think about your Goliath, your industry's 800-pound gorilla, or the company that beat you on your last proposal. Think about the deal you lost because of nepotism or not being part of the old boys network. I've seen countless immigrants use being an outsider as fuel. The establishment becomes their enemy. Consider those who use misinformation to further their own interest at other people's expense. Focus on companies that use fear to manipulate people. This turns a passion into a cause and a crusade. Dr. Paul Saladino is the author of The Carnivore Code. Sure, he talks a lot about what he stands for, but he also talks about what he hates. On his website, he says, "I'm much more interested in optimal health than in dogmatic adherence to a mainstream narrative." He also writes, "Learn which foods are *T in my guide here." He's telling you who his enemies are and attacks big food companies and rails against companies that use seed oils and toxic ingredients. It fires him up and it fires up his audience. Dr. Saladino's videos on what foods he thinks are healthy are informative, but when he passionately attacks the enemies of health, his videos are captivating. It makes people get emotional and differentiates him from other health advocates. As much as people complain about clickbait, one of the most effective ways to capture people's attention is to create an enemy. Stories need villains, and villains need heroes to fight them. That's why, on April 9, 2023, Insider caught my attention with this headline: ChatGPT may be coming for our jobs. Here are the 10 roles that AI is most likely to replace. Talking about the pros and cons of ChatGPT doesn't excite or infuriate anyone. But if it's thought of as an enemy, potentially humanity's enemy, we want to know more. And if we really believe ChatGPT is going to take away our jobs and businesses, we level up to sharpen our own skills to compete with it. Just for fun, I asked ChatGPT about the power of choosing an enemy in business. It said this: "As an AI language model, I cannot encourage or endorse choosing an enemy. It is important to foster positive relationships and connections with others, and to strive for understanding and empathy rather than animosity and conflict. Instead of focusing on creating enemies, it is much more productive and beneficial to focus on building meaningful relationships with people who share your values and interests." When I read that, it confirmed that ChatGPT is just spitting out the traditional view of enemies. I realized most people think this way, which in my view is why most people don't achieve incredible success. Because the way I embrace enemies is unique, it confirmed my belief that an AI model couldn't have created this formula for business planning. Now let's look at a list to see if you can identify your enemies. 14 types of enemies. Outside yourself. 1. Someone you hate. 2. Relatives who try to hold you back. 3. Manipulators. 4. Gossipers. 5. Someone to prove wrong. 6. Your ex-spouse or former business partner. 7. Someone who doubts you. 8. People who quit on you. Within yourself. 9. Scarcity mindset. 10. Your own limited thinking. 11. Your ego. 12. Contentment/mediocrity. 13. Fear of success. My vote for the most powerful enemy that drives winners. 14. People who are beating you because their vision and accomplishments are greater than yours. The right enemy triggers the right actions. A true enemy is one that can put up a fight. One of the main reasons we Launched Valuetainment was to defend values and principles that are being demonized in America. At times, that means we have to bully the bully. Our enemy isn't other media companies or influencers. It's an entire way of thinking that's hurting our youth, hurting families, hurting communities, and confusing what a true hero is nowadays. To me, anything that goes against business, freedom, and capitalism is an enemy. What ticks me off are ideologies like control, bullying, and manipulation. What makes my blood boil is to see bad ideas spreading. When ideas that hurt business and get in the way of freedom gain traction, they fuel me to create better content. The most powerful enemy is people who are beating you because their vision and accomplishments are greater than yours. It's the punches that land closest to the heart that hurt the most. When those men disrespected my dad, I had plenty of reasons to believe that my dad had raised a son who wasn't going anywhere in life. The fear that I would never be able to make him proud tore me apart. The one man in particular who insulted my dad didn't become my enemy because he was weak. It was because he was winning in life, and I saw his kids following in his footsteps. And deep down, I was terrified that I would never accomplish anything that would make my dad proud. For most of us, pain is a much more powerful motivator than pleasure. The right enemy triggers the right actions. As you'll see in a moment, I chose as my next enemy someone who was beating me because his vision and accomplishments were greater than mine. Don't choose your enemies unwisely. Jordan Peterson, the best-selling author and Canadian professor, explains the problem of choosing a weak competitor. He said, let's say you pick a level of competition where you're always winning. Well, all that means is you picked the wrong level of competition. Peterson went on to say how ridiculous it would be for a chess grandmaster to compete only with amateurs. By the way, to people who aren't looking to improve, picking on weak competition is the perfect way to satisfy their egos while quickly losing their edge. Peterson also said, what you should be doing is playing people who are beating you as much as you can tolerate. Quick thought exercise, turn back the clock and go back to a time when you were struggling. One day, you were walking out of the office at 4:59 p.m. and the top salesman, let's call him Gus, got right in your face and said, I guess you think beer tastes better than success, loser. You tried to brush it off and act like you didn't hear it. Then, if your car didn't start or had been repoed, you might want to kill Gus. When you experience shame, whether from a failure or someone's words, it will cut deep. That's the moment of fight or flight. Distract yourself or improve yourself. Numb the feeling or dive into the feeling. The cautious majority would play the victim and tell everyone at the bar that night what a jerk Gus is. The audacious few would make Gus the enemy and set out to destroy him. If, in that moment, you decided that you would do everything in your power to make Gus eat his words, you were onto something. If you went back to the office, made 150 cold calls, and left at 4 a.m., the fire had been lit. You had been moved emotionally, and you had chosen the right enemy. If you had been playing the game for duration, it would not have taken long for you to pass Gus and leave him in the dust. Let's say you went on to start your own company and started killing it. Then one day, out of the blue, Gus tagged you on a social media post, spreading false information. All your anger from Gus's original comment came roaring back. You made it your mission to destroy Gus. You have chosen the wrong enemy. At this point in your career, Gus is the equivalent of an amateur chess Player to Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen. He's no longer worth your time. Even thinking of him as an enemy will only serve your ego. There are many examples of choosing the wrong enemy. Let's say you had an employee who you treated like gold. You gave him every chance. And even after he stole from the company, you went above and beyond to give him a fair severance. A few days later, you noticed a negative review on Glassdoor that included cheap shots about your character. If the thought of destroying your former employee comes to mind, you're human. If it stays on your mind, you have chosen the wrong enemy. Sure, take whatever action you can to mitigate the bad review, but once you've done so, you can't give this person another thought. He is not worthy of being your enemy. The minute you get successful, people will be gunning for you. When I started my company and had no money, everyone was rooting for me. When my business took off, many of those cheerleaders turned on me. Some even hit below the belt by telling lies that hurt my reputation. It's the price you pay for success. You're going to get negative Google and Yelp reviews. Even when you do nothing wrong, people will report you to a consumer protection agency and the Better Business Bureau. They'll file false unemployment claims. What do all these people have in common? They all exist in your rear view mirror. These are annoyances that don't deserve to be dignified with the word enemy. An ex-spouse who is constantly gaslighting you creates a challenge. You are probably this person's enemy, and they won't ever stop trying to drag you into battles. Don't take the bait. If you don't have kids with this person, avoid them at all costs. If you do have kids, it will be hard to avoid getting pulled into their drama. If you're a short-term thinker, you may be tempted to go to war with your ex and show your kids that you're the better parent. If you're a long-term thinker, you will take the high road, swallow your ego, and show respect to this person, especially because your kids are always watching. Making an ex-spouse your enemy will create a negative impact on both you and your kids. Doing so publicly, as Kanye West learned the hard way, is an even bigger mistake. Whether you are right or wrong, letting the press know about your divorce can only make you look bad and create distractions for your business. Choose enemies that give you energy, not drain your energy. 5 unworthy enemies. 1 companies trailing you in the marketplace. 2 people you have surpassed in your business or on your career path. 3 relatives who put you down because they are jealous of your success. 4 toxic people who try to pick fights and bring out the worst in you. 5 small thinkers with a victim mentality. Identify all the competitors and underestimate none. Now that we know who to choose, and who to skip, as our enemies, let's shift from enemy to competition and build the logical block. Imagine if the Coca-Cola company thought its only competitors were PepsiCo and Keurig Dr. Pepper. This would mean its leaders were thinking too narrowly. Since Coca-Cola is in the non-alcoholic beverage industry, they have to look at all threats in that space. Protein drinks, bottled water, and energy drinks were barely part of the picture half a century ago. Now those categories are a huge part of the market. A threat can be an idea. As sad as it sounds, diabetes education and prevention is a threat to soft drinks. Campaigns to get sugary drinks out of schools are also a threat. Better municipal water combined with a marketing campaign that makes consumers trust their tap water could decrease sales of bottled water. As you can see, threats and competition go hand in hand. Now are you seeing how Coca-Cola has to expand its competitive lens beyond Pepsi and Dr. Pepper? Stop saying you don't have any competition. If you're doing that, you're not thinking about how your customers solve their problems. Imagine saying that you're going to be the only company that has a party bus from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. 1. It's hard to see how that would be sustainable, and 2. You are also competing with airplanes and cars. If, instead, you identified your competition more broadly, you could figure out how to differentiate your service. Since many people can't stand airport security, flight delays, and baggage restrictions, we're going to offer a luxury bus with Wi-Fi, high-end TVs, and beverages. This will cost less than a tank of gas and eliminate the hassle of driving. The party will start the minute you step on the bus, and it will be a fun and economical way to get to Vegas with all your stuff. Your job is to identify the pain points of consumers, and then position yourself to solve those pain points. With a statement like the one written above, instead of pretending you don't have competition, you have devised a strategy to beat them. For Elon Musk, he's thinking much bigger than a party bus. His boring company has already created an underground transit system that links the Las Vegas Convention Center to casinos. His plan is to extend it all the way from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. His competition is air travel, so he needs to make sure his service is priced according to its value. His competition is also regulators and anyone fighting to stop him from building it. The petroleum industry, for example, could be a silent competitor that is lobbying against the transit system. Ask any mortgage broker what their biggest threat is. It's not the company next door or the online brokers. It's rising interest rates. The same goes for home builders, though they have another threat to deal with in supply chain issues. If, for example, a home builder can streamline their supply chain by using local suppliers, it will address a threat and get a leg up on their competition. If you think the only competition for a private secondary school is other private secondary schools, you have blinders on. What about homeschooling, online learning, and a recession? Even ChatGPT is changing the game for schools because it makes information a commodity. For private colleges, their competition isn't just other private schools and lower-cost public schools. It's also changes in student loan policies, a recession, and, maybe more importantly, a shift in how people view education. The moment the narrative shifts and people stop believing that a college degree is required for career success, the value proposition gets destroyed. Taking a broad view of your competitors doesn't mean stressing out about what could go wrong. It means being deliberate about identifying your competitors to see how they will go after you and poking holes in your own business model. Once you see this, you have to adapt your key differentiators to meet the needs of your customers. For the top universities, online education started out looking like a threat, but once these schools realized they could create their own online courses and degrees, it became an additional revenue source. Indirect and unseen competitors. 1. Interest rates. 2. Changes in customer behavior. 3. Technology that can make you obsolete. 4. The economy and economic trends. 5. Legislation and lobbyists. 6. Companies that meet customer needs in different ways. 7. Paradigm shifts that impact your value proposition. The best detective is you. When you get better at gaining information about the competition, you make better decisions that minimize risk and increase returns. This is exactly what you, as a business owner or entrepreneur, want to do to improve your odds of longevity. You can hire all the research firms and consultants you want, but the best approach is to research the competition yourself. When I was selling gym memberships for Bali Total Fitness in my Early 20s, I wanted to find out the scripts for my competitors. I would call LA Fitness and 24-Hour Fitness and pretend to be a customer. I would listen to their pitches and take notes. I would then give every objection in the book so I could hear their rebuttals. Again, I took notes and added them to my own list for how to overcome objections. Once I found out everything I wanted to know about them, I tried to find out everything I could about my company. That's when I started calling other Bally gyms as well. It's what marketing firms get paid to do. Since few will do it with the same attention to detail as you, I recommend you start by doing it yourself. Right after hearing how Bally pitched, I would call up my competitors and say, "My girlfriend keeps telling me we should join Bally. She's convinced it's the best gym in town." That was the perfect way to hear how my competition sold against me. They would list all the bad things about Bally. They require a contract. People sue them all the time to break their contracts. Their equipment is outdated. They don't have basketball. Their hours are shorter. I would play right into it. "Yeah," I said, "but they also have a steam room and jacuzzi, and she says they have the best personal trainers." Again, I would shut up and listen. They would tell me every bad thing that they tell all their customers about Bally. So what do you think happened? When I would sit down with a new prospect, I was already 5 moves ahead of them. I could say, "I bet the guys at 24-Hour Fitness probably told you ... They would look at me like, "Yeah, that's exactly what they said." And because I knew my competition, I had already rehearsed how I would sell against them. In the movie Air, Sonny Vaccaro, played by Matt Damon, told Michael Jordan's mom, Dolores, played by Viola Davis, exactly what Converse and Adidas would say in their pitches. He even instructed Mrs. Jordan on what questions to ask that would highlight weaknesses in Converse and Adidas. When those pitches went exactly as Vaccaro described them, he gained a huge advantage. You can only gain this type of edge when you are maniacal about studying the competition. With social media, your competitors are making it easy for you to study them. Go to their LinkedIn page, their Facebook page, and their websites. It's simple to compare not only prices, but also products and service offerings online. If you're not doing this, you're missing out on ways to win. The greater the competition, the more research you need to do. And let's not forget about how the enemy ties in here. The more you fear and respect your enemy, the more obsessive you will become about researching your competition. If you're opening a new sports bar, you'd better do more than visit every sports bar in town. Don't just show up once. Go at different times on different days and ask dozens of questions. Tip well and ask the servers and bartenders what nights are slowest. Pay attention to their specials. See how they market themselves on days when there aren't many sporting events. Do all the competitive analysis that you can by yourself. And if you have the budget, also invest in market research. I've done this for every job I've ever had. When I started with Morgan Stanley in 2001, I'd call Smith Barney and T.D. Waterhouse and make up a good story. I knew what would qualify me as an ideal prospect, so I would say that I had recently inherited money. Then I would ask, "What's different about you? Why should I trust you with my aunt's hard-earned money?" I would listen and take notes. Then I would say, "My brother has a friend who works at Morgan Stanley, and he thinks we should pick them." They would start talking, and I would start writing. I wanted to know exactly how they sold against us. And guess what? With my detective skills, they never outsold me again. Key questions about competitors. 1. Who are your direct competitors? 2. Who are your indirect competitors? 3. What competitors aren't so obvious but still need to be monitored? 4. Who are you underestimating? The people who get underestimated the most are those without much experience. They have nothing to lose. 5. Where are your opponents strong? What markets/areas will you concede? 6. Where are your opponents weak? What markets/areas will you attack? 7. Who can you acquire? What strategies will you employ to acquire them at the lowest valuation? Weaken them to drive down the price. 8. Who could acquire you? What strategies will you employ to get acquired at the highest valuation? When you can identify the competition, you can devise a strategy to beat them. Make a broad list of competitors and figure out how you differentiate yourself. As you prepare for the upcoming year, and the next 2 decades, you have to see beyond what currently exists. Use competition to conserve capital. Now let's look at competition from another angle. When you're planning the upcoming year, as much as you think about growing revenue, you also have to think about containing costs. One of the best ways is to always have several companies bidding on your business. When I delegate anything to my team, whether it's buying computers or office equipment, hiring lawyers, or choosing a convention hotel, they know to always come to me with at least 3 options. Why do you think used car salesmen are always pushing you to buy today? Because if you studied the competition, you would find a better price. If you took it to the next level and solicited multiple bids, you could pit each dealer against each other. In doing so, you gain control and get the best deal. And when you stop doing this, especially with lawyers and consultants, you end up leaking a lot of money. In a mastermind that I led, I was talking to an entrepreneur who kept getting calls from private equity companies looking to invest capital in him. He has a solar business doing $70 million a year, with $10 million in EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Which is the bottom line number most investors want to know. It was no surprise why private equity companies wanted a piece of him. I asked, "Have you ever raised money before?" He told me no. This was all foreign to him. I warned him that even though companies are courting him, it wouldn't be long before they started bullying him with unfavorable terms. They would ask for as much equity as possible and create more ways to control him. The key word is control. Whether it's by demanding board sets or outlawyering him with clauses in the agreement, he was going to be facing vultures who presented themselves as allies. The way to fight back was with knowledge, specifically research about the competitors in this space. I told him to go online and find out what the last 10 solar companies sold for. Then see who sold/brokered the deals, and who bought them. If you find your business in a similar situation, it's easy to search for a company who represents a seller. It's probably a big company like Goldman Sachs, UBS, or JP Morgan Chase. Call those investment bankers. Here's the script. Is this John Doe? Great. I noticed you sold XYX for $X. I run a solar company. Our revenue is $X and our EBITDA is $Y. I'm on the Inc. 5000. I'm being approached by other buyers and investors. Before I choose to partner with one of them, I thought it best to do my own research to see what the market will say. What are investors interested in today? What's important to them? What do they value the most? Is it just EBITDA? Is it technology? Is it markets others are not in? What does the market landscape look like? Do you do deals like this? What's your fee structure? Then call at least 3 other investment bankers. Just as I was ahead of people when I sold gym memberships because of the research I did, you'll gain the same advantage. It's interesting you say that. I just spoke to John over at Goldman. They were the ones who sold ABC. They told me that their structure is ... Now they know you've done your homework, they have to get more competitive. You will get the best deal from your investors and negotiate the best terms by making them aware that you are studying their competition. As you plan for the upcoming year, do an audit of all your expenses. For anything above $1,000, make sure you are getting at least 2 bids. If it's over $5,000, 3 bids, and if it's over $25,000, 4 bids. This is especially important for all your service providers like IT consultants, insurance companies, and attorneys. Tell them exactly what you're doing. You'll find out quickly that their prices change when they know you are shopping their competition. Keep finding new enemies. By now, you may be thinking I'm cutthroat. And if you're a psycho competitor, you're loving this. You're not going to find this in any other books. This is not chicken soup for the soul. If you can recruit an enemy that makes you emotional, I feel sorry for that enemy. Enemies are the solution to laziness. I guarantee you that if you have the right enemies that create the right emotions, you can't be lazy. How long would you let somebody offend your wife in front of you before you reacted? Do you need a week? A month? What if you're tired at that moment? Will it stop you from taking action? I never stop looking for people who drive me. Each year I identify at least one specific enemy. I've got stories for days about enemies who motivated me. A public hospital administrator who shamed me when my dad got sick. She wouldn't attend to my dad when he needed her after another heart attack. A company that didn't listen to my suggestions and basically told me to shut up and sell. A company that sued me when I started my own company. My high school guidance counselor, Ms. K, who said, "I feel sorry for your parents. If I was your parent, I'd also have heart attacks. You've brought a lot of pressure on them." Let me remind you that all my stories are to get you to think about your own life. Take a moment to think of at least 3 enemies in your life. I don't want you to be a spectator in this process. When I was 25, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. After my dad had been shamed at the Christmas Eve party, I used the fuel from that enemy to gain knowledge and momentum. Since my expedition got repossessed, I was driving a Ford Focus without power windows. As I started to make some money, I was no longer drowning in debt and worrying about paying my bills. I was successful enough that I could relax a little. There was some comfort in not being broke, but I could also see that I was getting too comfortable. Based on the last quarter of the year, I had hit a plateau. There was nothing to indicate that my next year would be any better. Just as I am advising you to do, I had to choose a new enemy. Those men at the party no longer riled me up. The wound that had once been so raw had mostly closed. That's when I realized that I needed a new enemy. Let's call him Harry. He was a direct competitor to the firm I was in. Harry was known for being disrespectful, and I didn't like the way he spoke to the people who reported to him. You can spot 2 trends here. First, I don't like bullies who abuse power. Second, as you saw from the men who belittled my dad at the Christmas Eve party, I am territorial. I can't stand people who offend my family and colleagues. Harry was one of the highest earners in my industry, had a beautiful wife, and was also making big bucks as a motivational speaker. Sometimes God will put a Goliath in front of you to bring out the David in you. When my Goliath didn't appear, I went looking for him. I found out about a big convention in Phoenix where Harry was speaking. I got into my Ford Focus and drove 6 hours through the desert, so I could hear what he had to say. Harry may have known who I was, but he didn't think I was in his league. I was too much of an amateur back then to be a worthy competitor. The fact that I felt as if Harry disrespected me was all in my head. Take that as guidance. Your enemy doesn't even have to know they are your enemy. Harry was making $2 million a year and living in a $4 million house. His speech was sick. He knew how to use emotion to sell the dream, and he was detailed enough to outline a logical path. He wasn't a millionaire by accident. So, of course, everyone was kissing this guy's ass. After the speech, I fought through a group of people until I was face to face with him, and, as if I were possessed, I said to him, "I'm going to build a business 10 times bigger than yours, and you will never be able to compete with me on my level." A confrontational approach isn't for everyone. In fact, in the book The Art of War, Sun Tzu says, "Never wake up an enemy." But for me, I was trying to wake myself up. The right enemy will do something for your business that all the capital in the world can't. If you find the right enemy, it could be worth millions, if not more. I didn't have a shred of evidence to show that I could succeed, but I had fire in my eyes, and I confronted Harry. He flipped. Security started inching closer to us. Everyone around us thought we were going to fight. I wasn't going to throw a punch, but I was prepared to protect myself. I braced for impact. To the relief of security, Harry attacked only with words. He called me every name in the book. Those insults didn't really sting, but then he got specific. "Bet David, you're full of shit. You're not willing to work as hard as me. You're not as focused as me. You're not as great of a leader as me. And you never will be." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Thanks, buddy. That's the exact message I drove 6 hours to hear." Harry looked as confused as the group that had gathered around us. Those looking for a fight didn't get their wish, but I sure did. Right after I thanked Harry, I took a deep breath and thought to myself, that was exactly what I needed to hear. He said things that were true that others had been afraid to say. What a gift. Now we are going to war. This approach may sound extreme. It is extreme. But this is a book written for the audacious few. It's not for the cautious majority. Immediately after this confrontation, I went on a massive run. I thought about Harry many times a day. I printed out his words and laminated them. "Bet David, you're full of shit. You're not willing to work as hard as me. You're not as focused as me. You're not as great of a leader as me. And you never will be. If you're going to use your enemy to create emotion, do everything you can to bring it to life." Sports teams are always looking for locker room material. Any bad word uttered by an opponent gets printed and placed on the bulletin board or written on the chalkboard. It could be a voodoo doll or a picture to put on your dartboard. The goal isn't to be ridiculous, it's to find ways to keep that enemy top of mind and in your face until you graduate to the next enemy. I keep a list of all the bad things people have ever said about me. I pull it up in my mind all the time. As if commanded by Sun Tzu, I keep my friends close, and my enemies closer. Graduating to new enemies. Years later, Harry got in trouble with the SEC and took a hard fall. And honestly, I was upset about it. For one, I didn't hate him as a person. And 2, I missed competing against him. When I heard about Harry's demise, did I rub it in his face? Of course not. If I did, that would only show that I was making the same mistake that Harry had made, choosing the wrong enemy. When I led my first public workshop on business planning at the end of 2021, there were mixed reactions at first. When I got emotional, some of the buttoned-up CEOs thought I had lost my mind. Then, during the Q&A, every question and comment was about enemies. People were crying. Emotions poured out whenever they spoke about their enemies. For the rest of the year, business owners and sales leaders were calling me to tell me how focusing on their enemy created exponential growth. One of the CEOs I mentor had grown his business from $10 million in annual revenue in 2016 to more than $40 million by 2020. Let's call him Pablo. He came to the workshop because, in 2021, he had hit a plateau. The problem is when you scale a business, you take on more overhead. So when growth was flat in 2021, he barely made any profit. As you can guess by now, I kept asking Pablo about his enemies. It turned out that his daughter had married a man whose father had bullied him growing up. Instead of bonding over the marriage of their kids, this man kept punking Pablo. The guy was barely making a living, so it was obvious to any outsider that he was driven by envy. But emotions aren't logical. For Pablo, all the childhood traumas came flooding back to him. And it distracted him from the business. It became a chain reaction that impacted him at work and at home. Instead of focusing on a worthy enemy, Pablo became distracted by an unhealthy obsession. It only took me asking Pablo a few questions for him to see his problem. He hadn't graduated to a new enemy. He was dominating his local market. He was making more money than he had ever imagined. Enemies had fueled him on his way up, and the fear of not being good enough turned him into a warrior. Subconsciously, he went looking for a new enemy. Pablo's mistake was choosing the wrong enemy. He started fighting a guy that he had already beaten. Wanting to get revenge on a guy who wasn't a worthy competitor wasn't going to get him anywhere. To graduate to a bigger enemy, you have to let go of enemies who don't deserve your energy. If you dwell on an enemy you have already beaten, you can't slay the next dragon. For Pablo, once he identified his new enemy, a regional competitor that had been stealing his market share and had better technology than him, he knew exactly how and where to direct his efforts. His systems and culture building blocks were weak. He had his own skill gaps to address, including conflict resolution. He left the workshop with a list of books to read. Clarity of enemy redirected his focus. That created a positive ripple effect. With his priorities back in order, he was able to mend fences with his childhood bully. As a result, his relationship with his daughter improved, and he was on his way to building a happy extended family. Let this be a cautionary tale. Pablo's business could have very easily unraveled if he had continued to choose his enemies unwisely. When you're up against it, call on your enemies. Your enemy is also your competition, but your competition may not always be your enemy. In fact, when you don't have an emotional charge against a competitor, that might make you complacent. When you do have a charge, you find strength that you didn't know you had. In 2011, I was lying in bed next to my wife, Jennifer. My business had been around for 2 years, and just when I thought we had crawled our way out of despair, I got a call with some bad news. This person told me, North American is going to drop your contract in 30 days. They were our biggest insurance carrier, a $40 billion company. Without a carrier, we didn't have a product to sell. Without a product to sell, we didn't have a business. Things looked pretty bleak. My competitors were out for blood. They got ahead of me and started calling other carriers, telling them I was going out of business and not to work with me. Word on the street spread that I was about to go bankrupt. Sadly, the rumors were true. I can say all this now, but at the time, we couldn't show any weakness or let anyone know we were running out of money. I couldn't blame North American for wanting to drop us. We were weak on too many of the building blocks. We didn't have the technology, the infrastructure, or the systems. I wasn't qualified to be a CEO. I talked to the president of North American, Garth, and pleaded with him to keep the contract. I told him the truth, that I didn't have any other options and would be forced out of business. Garth showed some empathy, but he was looking out for his business, not for me, and he remained unconvinced. North American dropped us. But even with all this turmoil, I knew we had to show strength. Jennifer had married me knowing that I could have easily sustained a multi-seven-figure income if I had stayed with my former company as a sales leader. Instead, I had $13,000 to my name and everything going against me. People were calling her to tell her what a mistake I had made. And they had plenty of evidence to support that claim. I came home at midnight from the office with her in bed crying because she just had a miscarriage. She was doing her best to keep it together, but all the pressure was a lot to bear. It was getting to both of us. What made it even worse is that I felt like it was all my fault that this was happening. If I hadn't left my job and started a company, our lives would have been far more peaceful. It was 1:30 a.m. when Jen finally fell asleep, and I walked outside. We lived in an apartment complex called The Summit. I grabbed my iPod and turned on Foreigners I Want to Know What Love Is because it took me back to my military days. Plus, I literally wanted to know what love was in the insurance industry because I didn't have any of it at that time. As I walked, I prayed and spoke to God. I asked, why is this happening? I felt like I was doing all the right things. I was working 100 hours a week. I was reading. I was driving my team. I was leading. I kept asking God, why did this happen to us? Looking back, I realized that I sounded like a victim, which didn't serve me in any way. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm warning you that, if you have a big vision, you will encounter moments like this many times. You'll be faced with decisions that will feel like life and death. This is part of the price we have to pay to do something big. Again, that's why this book is only for the audacious few. I didn't sleep that night. All I thought about was everyone who had doubted me, bullied me, shamed me, and badmouthed me. I can tell you a couple of their names and what they said. Barney, you won't make it. You don't have the experience of running an insurance agency. Edgar, you will fail and file bankruptcy. You're a phony company. As I lay in bed, all I could think about were these enemies. Edgar had called everyone in the industry to spread the rumor that we were going out of business. He had also created burner accounts and would go around trashing me until one time he didn't switch over his accounts on Facebook. And we realized it was him. Edgar quickly deleted the message and said it was his assistant, who had his phone. Even while it was happening, I knew it was all a game and saw it as a sign of weakness. In fact, it gave me confidence to know that Goliath was scared of David. Not to mention that if I had thrown in the towel, Edgar and the rest of my doubters would have been right about me. I had too much pride to give them that satisfaction. When Jen woke up, I still hadn't been able to calm myself down. Knowing that neither of us were in the best state, I asked, "Do you think we made the right decision to start the company?" She looked at me and could see the pressure weighing on me. After a few seconds, she said, "Whatever you do, babe, I got your back." I realized in that moment that, for all my faults and mistakes, I had done two things right. I had chosen my enemies wisely, and I had chosen my life partner wisely. The enemies propelled me, and my wife supported me. I also realized that there wasn't time to feel sorry for myself and act like a victim. The next day, I called everybody and anybody I knew. I uncovered possibilities that I didn't know existed. Before that day, I wouldn't have considered doing business with AIG because they needed 3 months of premiums in advance. But with my back against the wall, I called AIG. My only request was for them to look me in the eye before saying no. When they agreed, I immediately flew out to Houston, Texas. In 2011, AIG had plenty of enemies as well. In fact, AIG was the most hated company in America then. They barely stayed in business after the financial crisis. I'll never forget sitting in that room in Houston with 20 people around the table. Here I was, a guy who had barely graduated from high school, in a boardroom filled with lawyers and compliance executives, using every ounce of both emotion and logic to sell them on why it was safe to do business with me. They grilled me non-stop, asking questions left and right. Some of the people in the room were convinced. Others looked as if they couldn't wait for me to leave. I didn't waver. The stakes were too high for me to let up. It took nearly 3 hours before they said they would even consider giving me a contract. They needed us, and we needed them. We were united by our desire to prove our enemies wrong. I continued to sell them, and finally they agreed. We got the contract and saved the business. My company's unsung hero was Edgar, our enemy. He may have hurt us in the short term, but in the long term, he made us tougher than nails. 9 years later, North American came to recruit us. Did we turn our nose up and tell them no? That's ego. That's foolish pride. That's not good business. We said yes. They were never our enemy. They were just a smart company that was the catalyst for me to leverage my enemies and find a gear I didn't know I had. Even though it ended poorly the first time around, we now have a great relationship with them. Compassion for your enemies. By now you understand how to choose your enemies and the importance of graduating to new enemies. People like Edgar and Harry were great motivators at the time, but once they served their purpose, I stopped letting them occupy real estate in my mind. As our friend Pablo learned, enemies are healthy. Grudges are not. None of my enemies that drove me when I first started in business drive me anymore. I now appreciate them as competitors because they keep fighting. I have tremendous respect for anyone who's willing to get in the arena. Whether it's dirty or fair, I'm a big boy. I understand the game. I don't believe in kicking people when they're down. In a sales contest, you can run up the score and call out your teammates. That's all part of a healthy competitive culture. But you also don't cross certain lines. After Harry got in trouble, he spread awful rumors about me. I had graduated to new enemies, but for him, I was enemy number one. Then, out of the blue one night, Harry called me right before midnight. I could tell he was crying. Harry confessed how broken he was when he lost 10 of his brokers and got in trouble with the SEC. I listened and did my best to comfort him. We agreed to meet at Denny's, and I treated him like a human being, not an enemy. In the UFC, guys talk trash to each other. They fight until the death, and then when it's all over, they hug. There is mutual respect between people who put their bodies and pride on the line in front of millions of people. That's why I'm willing to help any entrepreneur who goes through tough times. I can put the past aside, and one man to another, do my best to help him out. I gave Harry a CD of a sermon from my pastor, Dudley Rutherford, which I thought would give him the right perspective to deal with adversity. An hour later, at 2:30 in the morning, Harry called me again in tears. He told me how much he needed to hear this message. I respect and understand the pain of building a business, which is why I was there to support him. Don't be surprised if your enemies come back to you. You know that expression, hustle until your haters ask if you're hiring. It's happened to me dozens of times, and I've hired many of them. Some of my enemies even became allies who helped me fight bigger enemies. And that can only happen if you treat your enemies with the compassion and mutual respect the moment calls for. Above all else, choose wisely. We have covered a lot of ground in this chapter. When most people start out in business, they can identify their enemies. It forces them to find another gear and they start to win. Then for the cautious majority, complacency kicks in. When I see that happen, when there's no longer any fire, people start to plateau. More often than not, a fall is on its way. That's what happens if you don't replace old enemies with new ones. Just as a boxer graduates to tougher opponents, you must keep graduating to new enemies. Enemies are emotional. Studying competition is the logical building block and will play a big role in your success. You have seen how to do the research yourself and go beyond the surface. Take a broad view of your competitors and assume they wake up every day with the goal of putting you out of business. Studying the competition and choosing the right enemies will continue as long as you care to have a business. Choose wisely. Your blocks. Enemy actions. 1. Go back through your life to identify your enemies. The ones who produce the most emotion get the highest grades. 2. Write out specifically what was said by an enemy that stung the most. The look. The smirk. The more details, the better. 3. Pick a specific enemy for this year, season, or campaign. Name at least one for you personally and one for your business. 4. Remove any unworthy enemies. Check your ego. Identify who you're holding a grudge against or who is below you now and let them go. 5. Decide right now how you will celebrate when you defeat your enemies. Competition actions. 1. Who are your direct competitors? Who are your indirect competitors? 2. Make a list of other solutions that compete to meet the needs of your current and prospective customers. 3. Ask the right questions and identify the competition that doesn't yet exist. 4. Become a detective and study your competitors to see how they position themselves against you. Watch how they answer calls and email requests. Study their social media and their websites. Analyze their approach to learn your own weaknesses and how to differentiate yourself from them. 5. Go through expenses and make sure you are getting multiple bids on all your products and services.